Welcome to National Skills Coalition's first Summit sequel. We are hosting a series of virtual events following our annual Skills Summit to continue the conversation about federal and state skills policies that can contribute to an inclusive economic recovery. I'm Kate Kinder, State Strategies Director West for National Skills Coalition. We are thrilled to be joined by a panel of innovative leaders in the field, and we will hear from them shortly. Today's discussion will be focusing on the critical role that holistic support services play in increasing educational attainment and advancing economic mobility. Before we dive into this discussion, I want to provide some brief context on why this issue matters to so many in National Skills Coalition's network. As we work to build an inclusive economy, we see access to high quality skills training and education as a foundational component of any commitment to advance racial and economic equity. While it's not the only solution, certainly we need to address other inequities and structural barriers, but it's an essential element of meeting the needs of today's students and workers, communities, and local employers. Nationally, we know that pre-pandemic, there were over 60.5 million Americans, 25 and older, without post-secondary education, and 25.6 million Americans 25 and older without a high school equivalency. So over 86 million adults who need access to high quality education and training programs in order to build the skills and earn the credentials that lead to quality jobs. These are staggering opportunity gaps. We also know from workers and learners themselves that they want access to post-secondary education and credentials. In a recent study by Illumina Foundation and Gallup, 94% of those who are currently enrolled in post-secondary education reported that they saw that earning at least one credential beyond high school was critical to attaining the job that they wanted. For those who are considering enrollment, that number was 80%. There's clearly a compelling need, value, and want for access to post-secondary education and credentials, yet the cost of attending college and training continues to be lifted up by policymakers and learners themselves as one of the top reasons that far too many aren't attending and completing. These rising costs of attendance go far beyond tuition and fees. They include transportation, childcare, books and tools, and basic needs like food and housing. The costs that are facing today's students, adults who are balancing complex lives, who are working, who are attending school and training, who are caring for children and parents. These costs have also led to unprecedented rates of basic needs and security, with research out of the Hope Center at Temple University finding that close to 2/3 of public, community, and technical college students face some form of basic needs and security, with rates climbing during the pandemic and impacting Black, Indigenous, people of color, and parenting students at greater rates. In order to address these systemic barriers, learners need access to holistic support services, benefits and resources to cover the costs of transportation, of childcare, books, basic needs, along with the staff who can help navigate the sometimes complicated eligibility requirements. Holistic support services can provide additional resources that help mitigate the impacts of racial wealth and gender pay gaps that disproportionately impact Black, Indigenous, people of color, parents, immigrants, and women who are pursuing post-secondary credentials. They can make the difference whether or not individuals enroll and complete high-quality education and training programs, be they integrated education and training programs at community-based organizations, career and technical education programs at community colleges, pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs, or the many other high-quality programs available that create pathways into quality jobs and meet the needs of employers. By prioritizing supportive service policies investments, we can better serve individuals by addressing the systemic inequities and recognize that the root cause of these are failed systems and structures and not individuals. For these reasons, holistic support services have been a long-standing policy priority of National Skills Coalition in our network, and they are threaded throughout our Making College Work campaign, our digital equity work, and our implementation of an inclusive economic recovery that is occurring on the national and state level. With that background and context set, I want to turn it over to hear from our panel of experts and leaders who bring a deep wealth of knowledge on how to create more inclusive pathways into post-secondary education and skills training programs. They are leading and supporting cutting-edge efforts to develop and implement holistic support policies, partnerships, and practices. First, I'd like to introduce President Mark Matui, College President at Portland Community College in Oregon. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to the National Skills Coalition for sponsoring this webinar, and it's great to be with all my fellow panelists. As Kate mentioned, I'm Mark Matui. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the president of Portland Community College, where we serve approximately 50,000 students annually. And according to 2019 data from Oregon's Higher Education Coordinating Commission, PCC serves the largest number of students of any higher education institution in Oregon that face equity barriers. About 22% of all higher education students in public 2 and 4 institutions that face equity barriers attend PCC. Our emphasis is on economic mobility through equitable student success. Our strategic initiatives, our new One College for Equitable Student Success organizational structure, our budget development process, our equity plans, our fundraising, our legislative and policy engagement are all centered on creating equitable opportunity through equitable student success for our region. When Melanie, my wife, and I moved to Portland, one thing that we found is that Portland has a lot of bridges, and we've come to think of PCC as one of them. On one end of the bridge, we have talented, hardworking folks. On the other end of the bridge, great jobs that need filling. Our average age is 28. Most of our students have caregiving responsibilities. They're working. They've had to move farther and farther out due to escalating housing costs. PCC is seeing, like most other institutions, increased barriers to getting from one end of the bridge to the other. And so our work, and I'm glad we're talking about this today, is to help more folks get from one end of the bridge to the other. I just want to end this introduction by quoting Eduardo Padron, President Emeritus of Miami-Dade College, who likes to say that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I think what we're talking about today is making opportunity as universal as the talent around us. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much, President Matui. Next, we have Shayna Pacak, Executive Director at Machinist Institute in Washington State. Welcome, Shayna.
Thank you. I'm honored to be part of this panel and can't wait for the further discussion on this topic.
Thank you. And Dr. Bill Pink, College President at Grand Rapids Community College in Michigan. Welcome,
Hey,
Pink.
Good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are. Bill Pink, President of Grand Rapids Community College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Happy to share more about what we do here at GRCC as time permits, but also honored to be a part of this panel. Awesome people to be a part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pink. And last but not least, Jennifer Zeissler, Senior Program Director at ECMC Foundation.
Hi, and thank you for the introduction. ECMC Foundation is a national foundation based in Los Angeles, and we work to improve post-secondary success for students from underserved backgrounds. So looking forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. Shayna, can you talk a little bit more about the Machinist Institute and who you serve in your organization?
Absolutely, happy for the opportunity. So the Machinist Institute was created as a nonprofit by the International Association of Machinists 751 to really grow the training arm for the membership. So when I came on board in 2019, the vision is to create pre-apprenticeship, registered apprenticeship, and incumbent worker training across the spectrum for several different industries, including aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and some of the automotive mechanic employers that we serve. And before that, I had spent about 12 years supporting registered apprenticeship and the connection with the community college system in Washington State for the building trades. So I had a long history of understanding the needs around access and equity in registered apprenticeship and the promotional career success side of things as well. So really bringing that lens to the Machinist Institute. And we are a statewide program in Washington State, standing up training centers across the state right now. So it's very exciting to be a part of this and embedding the holistic student support impact everything that we're doing.
Great, thank you. Dr. Pink, can you tell us a little bit more about Grand Rapids Community College and who you're serving at your college?
Yeah, Kate, that's a horrible question to ask when I have other people on the panel. I spend all day talking about my institution. So Grand Rapids Community College, GRCC, we are the oldest community college in the state of Michigan and one of the oldest in the country. We are somewhere around 105 years old in the work that we've done in West Michigan. And in these last several years, I've been honored to serve a 5-year tenure here and as president. And what we've seen so much in terms of the people who we serve in West Michigan. First of all, we are probably around 12, almost 13,000 students who are credit bearing, going for credit bearing certificates and degrees on our campus. We are about, in pre-COVID days, we were about anywhere from 18 to 20,000 in some of our non-credit CTE work. And so that's a big story of what our institution does, aside from provide that work for those students who are looking to either go straight to work or transfer to another institution. The work that we do around our skills trade programs and CTE-based programs that just really partner with companies to get students to work, to get folks into good paying jobs. That's a big focus of ours. Two things we focus on here that I talk a lot about, and not only do I talk about it a lot here on campus, I talk a lot to institutions about it. The two words that people know that I'm going to talk about: are you relative and are you relevant and are you responsive? Are you relevant to the people that you serve, relevant to our community, relevant to our students, relevant to each other? How does that relevance look? And we've seen many who've taken their eye off that ball in decades past. All you got to do is look as far as Google. When's the last time you saw a Blockbuster video? That talks about relevance, right? When you lose track of what relevance is, you can find yourself not only irrelevant, but you can find yourself gone. And I'm a believer that if higher education, if we're not focused on staying relevant to our community, to our students, to each other, we can find ourselves in the same space, being one that is overlooked when it comes to the work that we ought to be doing. And our focus is how to be responsive to our community, responsive to our students, responsive to each other. That when we know that there's something we can do, and when we see that there's work to be done, that we can be responsive and as quickly as possible. There are no companies that want to tell us, yes, we need this as far as the workforce is concerned, and you guys can get to it in about 5 to 10 years. None of them are saying, they're saying, how can we work together to get this now, and in some cases yesterday? And so the responsiveness that we have as higher education institutions is vital, and in some cases it has to get over a reputation that we have of not being as responsive, as quickly responsive, taking 6 months to buy a pencil. We've got to have the responsiveness that our folks in our communities see and can depend on, and see the community college in this case as being not only a trainer and an educator of choice, but being a partner of choice. How do we partner with you? And so that to us, and that to our institution, Kate, is what we have really built, I think, our reputation on here in our local economy in West Michigan.
Great. Those are two good focuses for colleges and also for providers in general. Jennifer, turning to you, do you want to add any context or background for folks who aren't familiar with ECMC Foundation about your focus of your organization and what you're really looking at right now?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Again, focused on post-secondary success for students from underserved backgrounds, and really looking to increase those attainment rates, both the career and technical education and bachelor's degree attainment. So unsurprisingly, across the foundation, about 50% or more, I believe, is focused on community colleges. And I think that that's a really important point to uplift when we talk about our work and talk about higher education in general. I'd love to dive in on one of our initiatives, if that would be okay. Okay, so we, in addition to the work we do across our portfolios, we have a special focus on single mother students. And I appreciate some of what's been uplifted already, sort of setting the stage for me to talk about this. In our work, we started to see single mother learners specifically in career and technical education programs, but we couldn't find a lot of data to really support the size or needs of that population. And so when we started to dig in a little further, we found that more than 1 in 10 college students in the United States across all institution type are single mothers. If you're curious, you want to expand it out to student parents, it's about 20%. But when we look specifically at single mothers, we know that 90% have incomes at or near the poverty line. A disproportionate amount of women are women of color, and nearly half are attending community colleges. So again, bringing it back to community college. We also know that access to reliable childcare has tripled graduation rates among single mother students, but funding for on-campus childcare has declined steadily over the last couple decades. I think, the other thing to really, it's important to uplift, and again, somebody already touched on this, but we also recognize the time poverty experienced by single mother learners. A study that was funded by the Institute for Women's Policy Research found that women are spending 9 hours a day on caregiving, which in addition to work and school, really does not leave them much time for anything else. So if time allows, I'd love to lift up an example of this work, or happy to turn it back to you, Kate, and save that for later in the conversation.
Let's dive in a little bit later, but really want to get into that too. So thank you for sharing those examples and priorities. And so we've heard from our panelists really about how, from their different vantage points and organizations, colleges, really looking at addressing holistic support services and creating opportunities, access to post-secondary education, credentials, and really towards the final goal of attaining a quality job. For attendees out there, if you have any questions throughout, please put them into the chat, and we will have some space at the end for Q&A. And also we'll see some resources dropped in throughout. So to start, to further the discussion, I want to turn to you, President Matui. So Oregon recently passed landmark legislation, both last year's Benefits Navigator bill that funds a navigator at all 17 community colleges and 7 public universities, as well as the recently passed Future Ready Oregon bill that emerged from the Governor's Racial Justice Council and provides $200 million in funding for various workforce programs and initiatives. Can you please share how holistic support services are integrated into these historic workforce investments and why they are a priority for community college and other workforce development stakeholders who advocated for these policies?
Absolutely. Kate, as you remember, a lot of this started with Pathways to Opportunity, which Truth in Advertising, Kate Kinder helped to lead for the state of Oregon. Pathways to Opportunity was a project funded through the community colleges to create a community of practice around benefits integration. So this created a close partnership with the Oregon Department of Human Services. I want to give a shout out to the Department of the Division of Self-Sufficiency within DHS. They were courageous, amazing partners for the community colleges. They helped change policy in order to increase access to benefits for community college students. And so this community of practice looked at how can we integrate Pell, SNAP, STEP, the SNAP training and employment program, TANF, childcare, earned income tax credits, and other kinds of benefits together to wrap around students in a holistic manner to help them focus on school, study more, work less, and graduate. We knew from the Real College Survey that we were able to participate in from the Hope Center at Temple University that over 60% of our students, as Kate mentioned, experience housing or food insecurity. So one thing that we learned from Pathways to Opportunity was that there was a need for benefits navigators to help demystify and to destigmatize access to integrated benefits. So we were able to push for, and along with some legislative partners and with help from National Skills Coalition as well, we pushed for HB 2835. And this was known as the Benefits Navigator Bill. Got it passed. All 17 community colleges and now 6 public universities have benefits navigators on each college campus. And what this allows is each institution to be able to unlock the funds that students already are eligible for, but just didn't know that they were. And the money was already there. It just was so difficult. The systems can be so difficult to navigate. It made it very, very hard for students to be able to access it. The other is Future Ready Oregon. This is the $200 million investment that the governor actually tasked the Racial Justice Council to create a more equitable workforce system design. And so a big part of this is the introduction of culturally specific community-based organizations as new workforce intermediaries. And these culturally specific CBOs will partner with community colleges, with WIBs, with employers to create the bridge for the hardworking folks who need educational opportunity to access a better life, to access living wage jobs through education and training. So both of these are up and running. The first tranche of funding will come out this month or later this month for Future Ready Oregon. And we're very excited to get running and to get moving on implementing community college career pathways, for example, credit for prior learning, new programs to help underserved communities access a living wage through education and training.
Great. Thank you so much, President Matui. It's very exciting to see the investments that are the result of years and years of advocacy and students sharing their stories, providers advocating, community colleges, community-based organizations. So it's exciting to see some investments in creating access to better jobs and recognizing the critical role that holistic support services play. So we need the training, we need the partnerships and those support services to support learners and ensure there's equitable access across the state. So now I want to turn it over to another really critical form of training and a provider. So Shayna, as Machinist Institute expands pre-apprenticeships and registered apprenticeship opportunities across Washington State in partnership with labor and industry, can you please talk about how you are integrating holistic support services and why this is important?
Absolutely. And like Bill, it's dangerous to invite me into a panel with this topic because I do feel like I could talk a long time about it. It's very important to me. And I was doing a shout out to, my friends in Washington that I saw signing on in the chat when someone else said, we're all friends in workforce. And that's 100% true. We have to be friends and help each other through this work because it can be, very difficult. And registered apprenticeship can be one of the more difficult because it's so complicated. Not one program is the same. They all have different ways of delivery. I used to joke that it was like an onion, that each time you peeled off a layer, there'd be another layer and then you're crying. But now I say it's more like that toy when you're little, with the box with the shapes, and none of the shapes that I have fit into the holes on the box. And so when you're talking about access and removing barriers and systemic change, it can be very difficult with registered apprenticeship because they're not the same. And out of a national skills, the work-based learning academies, a lot of things that I'm investing in right now came out of that work that I did in my past job, which was spending a lot of time really putting yourself in the shoes of an apprentice And what does it look like when you decide you want to become an apprentice? What is the first step? Do you have to take your application into the hall and apply in person? Can you do it online? What things do you need to take care of? What are your upfront costs? And what are those times during your program where you might be unemployed and the cyclical nature, and then the non-standard hours? So we really did a deep dive into that with that Work-Based Learning Academy. And from that, I've taken that into this role around what are the services we want to do for our students, what are the barriers that we want to remove, and how are we going to do that from pre-apprenticeship through registered apprenticeship and beyond, especially if we are specifically looking at ways to increase the number of women in these careers, people of color, second chance citizens. And so one of the first things that I've done is hired a apprenticeship and student support specialist, which is kind of a rare position for a registered apprenticeship program. And the idea of that position is to have somebody whose sole focus is to do some interactive preventative touches with the apprentices. So checking in with them before life is derailing their academic and their work progress, and making sure how are you doing? Do you need any extra help on the academic side, any tutoring? And if not, what else do you need? Is childcare becoming a problem? Housing, transportation, all the things that we know can really derail somebody and change their focus from being successfully at work and academically into other things that they have to deal with. So we've hired that person full time. And then we are working with other community-based organizations because I feel like they are really the key to making sure we can all be successful. I'm not going to say we're going to become the experts in all of these different areas and then try to run it that way. When we have community-based organizations that are in those communities, that are trusted messengers, that know what they need to do for help, we just would rather work with them, work with the organizations like Seattle Jobs Initiative that already know how to do good case management to, what can we do? And then where do we do a handoff? So that's kind of our strategy around that. And then childcare being one of the larger hurdles. Oregon State had a study done a while ago. It's been quite a few years now, I think, that really pointed to some of these issues, and childcare being one of the main ones that can, really break the apprentice's ability to complete. And when I was hired, but before I actually started this job, my boss, the president of IAM 751, said, "Hey, I was talking to one of our members. They're going to quit because they're going to have a child and they just can't find childcare." And I said, "Well, I've already started a childcare task force for the building trades. I would love to, try to find solutions." Little did I know that would lead to us having a funding opportunity where we earmarked $2 million into starting a child care center in conjunction with the Institute and the IAM 751. And it terrifies me. But what we discovered when we started really talking to apprentices, because everybody says childcare and everybody knows the cost of childcare is it's exorbitant. And I provided a link that can be shared. It's a nice short little video about why childcare is expensive. And I honestly don't know that we're going to fix that without subsidies for childcare. However, the other problem was that people couldn't even find childcare for the non-standard hours. So when manufacturing has shift hours, it wasn't just the expense, it was not even being able to find anyone. So that's our goal, is to have childcare that we can make sure addresses the non-standard hours for as much as we can. We're also putting funds into supporting new family home childcare centers being opened that will have that non-standard hour capacity. And because that's not hard enough, I said, well, we're all about opportunities and advancement and learning. So if we're going to do that, then we should also be a training provider for registered apprenticeship for childcare providers. So that's all wrapped up into that. And we are definitely finding the experts to do that, because it is not me, but we're going to bring those others in to help us stand that up, and try to impact that. And I think there's other models all over the country of employers, of unions, of, intermediaries that are really trying to figure this out. And there's funding out there for it. Our Washington State Department of Commerce has had a lot of funds that have helped us do research and do studies and get to the real answers, which I think is important. We always talk about supportive services in these kind of buckets, but I think really talking to individuals and those communities that know what the needs are, and not always just make assumptions that if we just throw more money at childcare and let people have some benefits for longer, that'll solve anything. Some of these are much more complex than that. So those are kind of the areas that we're working on. We do still have a childcare task force that meets quarterly, and we've gotten it formally recognized as a subcommittee of our Labor and Industries Apprenticeship Council. So we meet and have these discussions and find ways to look at best practices. It takes a whole lot of different strategies to throw at this. So those are kind of our core efforts right now around that.
That is a really impressive list of both centering the individual and taking that person student-centered design approach and looking at their experience to identify what those obstacles are and the solutions that are needed, and then looking at really systemic wholesale solutions. And just especially the really dynamic approach to having a staff person who can help your apprentices and pre-apprentices. And then the childcare solution, really addressing it holistically, including with a center and developing a new apprenticeship model. So really excited to watch what this looks like over time in Washington. And then also, I think just those partnerships with community-based organizations and working with those who have the trusted relationships and know the community. And so that's a great transition to you, Dr. Pink. So I think I had the opportunity to hear you talk at a conference, and I was really struck by the work that you have led and that Grand Rapids Community College have done to build partnerships between community colleges, community-based organizations, workforce partners. But I started typing out the whole list and it was way too long. But really just a very intentional approach about creating access to education and post-secondary credentials and good jobs, but recognizing the role that those partnerships in your community play. So can you please talk about how this focus on partnerships has been key to connecting more individuals to education and training programs at your college and providing students with the holistic support services that they need to complete those credentials and access careers?
Yeah, and Kate, thank you for that. I will tell you that, bless your heart for having to listen to me at any kind of conference. So the thing about this is I'm a big believer, and I say it almost every time I get a chance to publicly, when it comes to these topics, you can't get these things done well without partnerships. You just can't. It's hard to get this done in a vacuum and say, we are going to do this and launch out on your own and figure you can have it all figured out of how to do it. Because as soon as you do that, you find partners in your community that are doing some things, and you realize, my goodness, if we just link with them, we can have so much of a holistic and community and contextual impact on this work. So for us, back in 2010, at this institution, we had a DOL grant, Pathways Out of Poverty. That was 2010. That was a launch in many ways for our institution because of the work that was done. But what it did, Kate, is that it partnered GRCC with our local Grand Rapids Urban League, our Hispanic Center of West Michigan, Goodwill, our Hispanic Chamber of Commerce here locally. It started pulling those entities to the table to say, you know what, how do we get at this together? How do we sit down and think about what type of connections and resources we all have, and how do we do more around collective impact? So out of that grant came about 3 or 4, the traction that was gained out of that because of some of the data we were able to produce. That also caused the Department of Labor to say, you know what, that's something worth investing in terms of what they're doing in Grand Rapids. So you follow that up in years following with an America's Promise grant that was at the $4 million mark. You talk about TAC grants. Our institution partnered with several other institutions here in Michigan. That TAC grant was around the $29 million figure. Our Strengthening Community Colleges grant, $6 million. Here recently, our One Workforce grant, which is focused on getting folks to work in AI and robotics and art and data analytics. That's another almost $10 million. And what those dollars are geared toward is really focused on how we reach into the communities that we're so focused on here. We call some of those are our neighborhoods of focus. Those are neighborhoods here in the urban center like Grand Rapids, of how we reach into those communities. And we give people the opportunity to have an education and training experience partnered with some of our community-based organizations. And this is what you were talking about, Kate. When we get these grants and when we do this work, it is partnered with community-based organizations, of which I mentioned earlier, and there are even more there. It's partnered with our Workforce Investment Board. Our WIB here, West Michigan Works, is a strong partner. We have an incredible partnership with our WIB. It's also partnered with our K-12 partners. Usually we want to bring some high schools to the table. And even as we're moving forward, we say, how do we bring middle schools to the table on some of this? Start early, try to get at some of these, the neighborhoods we're focused on. But also, if we can bring in a four-year partner and get one of our universities and some of our universities to that table, how do we pull them in so that there is indeed a pipeline or a highway, as I like to call it, that that individuals can see that highway and know how to go about that education highway. You have, and then our industry partners, they're vital to this whole conversation, because it is important that as we're doing this work, that there are industry partners right alongside who are saying yes. And as this happens, we want to make sure these are individuals that get hired. I don't want to give all these opportunities to people only for them to sit because their education we gave them had no relevance to it. We keep our industry partners close to us to make sure the education is relevant. There's another side to that though, Kate, as well, that what we can help provide for our industry partners is at the same time, especially as we are trying to, as we're bringing more people of color to these spaces, that we make sure that there is that contextualized part for that company. I don't want to prepare folks to go into companies that aren't welcoming and do not provide a sense of belonging for our students. Then what do we gain? And so what we try to do is try to do our best at making sure as we reach into our communities that those partners are right along board, all of those partnerships. And Jennifer, I look at you because for us, our standpoint, our philanthropic partners are vital to this work as well. So Jennifer, we need to talk as well. But it's important to us that we're making sure that all of those, because our philanthropic partners here locally, our W.K. Kellogg Foundation, based right here in Michigan, very strong in terms of that partnership. And when they realize the work that's happening here and that we are indeed getting these metrics met, that's when Kellogg Foundation and others, DeVos Foundation, others here locally come back around and say, how do we help you even more? Because if you're making those type of moves, then how do we help even more? And the last thing I'll say to that, Kate, I think it's vital that as we do these things, the other question becomes sustainability. It's great to get all these millions of dollars from federal and philanthropic organizations, but at the same time, we also ask the question, how can we sustain? How is this something that we can truly institutionalize and have some sustainability to it? That is usually a heavier lift because there are dollars that were in place that then go away. So if it is something that is truly worthwhile, how is it that those community partners still come to the table and say, hey, let's together figure out how we sustain this effort? And we've seen some examples of success in that regard. So that's all I'll say about that. But again, you can't do it well without partnerships. It just doesn't work as well.
Thank you, Dr. Fink. And that's been was my experience always in lots of different roles working in community college and in workforce, is those partnerships are so key. And those federal investments like strengthening community college and other were key in seeding innovation, and philanthropic partners were critical in really allowing more space for innovation. But it is those partnerships and working with communities and working alongside employers that are going to sustain it and ensure that there's that continual improvement. I really love how you talk about working with employers it's very reciprocal, so that making sure there's good jobs and that you're responsive to the training, but that employers also have a responsibility to be responsive to the community and their workers. So how do you support that work? And I think that happens through lots of policies and federal investments and through philanthropic investments, which is a great segue to Jennifer. And so I've had the pleasure of working with ECMC Foundation and just really appreciated the approach to really look at the issues holistically and support and invest in solutions. And so ECMC has been funding a number of initiatives that build these partnerships that Dr. Pink was talking about, that President Matui has talked about, that Shayna has talked about. And they really focus on increasing equitable access to post-secondary education and career pathways. Can you please share how holistic support services fit into these priorities and offer any examples of the impacts that you see occurring in the communities that you're supporting and investing in?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as you said, that the through line is definitely there across the conversation. So much of what Dr. Pink said resonated with me. And we talk a lot about that collective impact, the cross-sector collaboration, that all of these aspects are critical to building out career pathways and ensuring that the students we care about are successfully navigating those pathways. I think I'd love to uplift an example and drawing it back to our specific focus on single mother students. I don't want to give the wrong impression. We focus on a lot of different students and work across the foundation, but this is a really easy one to talk about in the context of this conversation. In 2020, we made a grant to the Women's Foundation for the state of Arizona to launch a program, what they call the Pathways for Single Moms. I'll drop a link in the chat once I'm done talking here. But so this work was done in partnership with local nonprofits and Pima Community College. And it does so many of the things that we've been talking about here. So they're offering those wraparound supports in partnership with the nonprofits. They're putting the students on a pathway to a career and technical education certificate that's aligned to local industries in Arizona, but that are also well-paying. So moving folks into those family sustaining positions. I think, to the things that I think are so interesting about this model, of course, the cross-sector collaboration, which we just talked about, the wraparound supports and the case management, which are so critical. They also work together with the governor's office to pass legislation, which would allow women in this program to utilize or to consider their education. I guess it was to change the definition of the child care subsidy. I guess I'll put it that way, so that they could attend school instead of working to access that subsidy. The other really interesting thing here is that they were able to leverage the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP Career Advancement Network, or SNAP can, to provide funding reimbursements and make the program sustainable. So I think it's just a really great example of what Dr. Pink was talking about, and the way that all of these stakeholders are coming together to align and to build out these career pathways. As I said, I'll drop a great clip from EdSurge in the chat.
Great, thank you. And really great to see the policy shifts to increase benefit access, that holistic support, those partnerships, and just that investment to I think sometimes that can make all the difference, is just having that funding and support to build the infrastructure to do this work can make all the difference in that space to do that. So shifting gears a little bit here, President Matui wanted to ask you a little bit more about your work. And in my experience, you've long been a strong advocate for adult learners. So it's always been really inspiring that you are always a voice for those who don't always have a strong voice. And that includes those who are in adult education. So want to look at that lens a little bit, is why are supportive service investments, the resources themselves, as well as the staff who can help learners navigate the resources and benefits, essential for increasing educational attainment and supporting students as they progress in their career pathway, particularly adult learners and those in adult education?
Thanks, Kate. Well, I think I would like to also underscore the new demographic realities and the skills gap that we currently have. Obviously, we certainly always want to provide resources, access for education to our young adults and opportunity youth. And in addition to that, we also know through Pacak, the Program for International Assessment of Adult Competencies, the adult PISA test, if you will, that we have 43 million adults in this country who are at level 1 literacy. And these are hardworking, talented folks. And I hesitate and don't like using the word low skilled adults because these folks have skills. They may not have had the educational opportunities. So you may have somebody who had to drop out of school in the 7th grade in another country so they could provide support for their family, and then immigrated here to the United States. Now have a family and they're really working hard to create a better future for their family and just need that educational opportunity. So if we are going to build a more equitable country and more equitable prosperity and the skills gap at the same time, we need to create those bridges to a better life for low-wage adults. And we at PCC have formed something called the Opportunity Council. This is where we bring together partners from the community with that purpose to create bridges of opportunity through education and training. One way, of course, is you've heard about is through career pathways. And so in investing in career pathways, as Future Ready Oregon has, we have found pretty high success rates. And our latest two career pathway cohorts had completion rates of 88%, 90% for students of color. And integrated education and training as a component of a career pathway is also very effective and an important element for increasing economic mobility. So IET, folks probably are already familiar, but if you're not, is where English as a second language instruction or adult basic ed and content, usually in a career technical education program, are presented and provided simultaneously and in an integrated fashion. Students pick up English faster, they pick up the content faster, they're more likely to graduate, and they're more likely to get a good job with a living wage. And employers get bilingual employees. So you could have phlebotomy, for example, or you could have medical assisting or HVAC. And students, again, do better, and employers have a more diverse and multilingual, multicultural workforce. We also are working on opportunity center concepts. So we have 2 opportunity centers that we're putting together, and the subtext for this is it's more than co-location. So the Department of Human Services has agreed to put 80 case managers in one of our opportunity centers. And we also are integrating in several culturally specific CBOs at the same time and a health clinic. The goal is for a student to walk in, or prospective student to walk in, and to be able to access seamless integrated benefits and services so that they can then access education and training programs that will help provide escape velocity out of poverty. So with that, we also are putting college property on the table with Home Forward, our housing authority in the Portland region. Home Forward is going to provide capital construction costs for affordable housing. We bring the property to the table. And our first project will be breaking ground next year, and we'll have about 100 units of affordable housing for students. So putting those 2 together, the goal is for a student with housing insecurity to be able to leave their apartment, go to the center, receive the SNAP, the TANF the childcare support they need, and then take one of our shuttles to any of the campuses to be able to get the education and training to lead a better life. One element that I really want to emphasize here that are particularly important for adults is meeting the opportunity cost of going to college. Because right now, students have tremendous financial hardship with inflation and childcare or caregiving responsibilities. It's becoming more and more difficult for folks to find the time or the money to be able to go to school. And anything that we in the community colleges can do to reduce the opportunity cost of going back to school is going to help folks access economic mobility through education and training. So this is particularly true for low-wage adults, and it's really important for us to have that policy focus. So speaking of policy focus, I do want to give a shout out to Oregon DHS for changing the policy requiring 20 hours of work per week to qualify for SNAP or STEP benefits. They really have the courage to do this at a politically sensitive time to eliminate the need for students to work an additional 20 hours. That increased access. We need both food pantries and food policy to be able to help our adult students.
Thank you, President Story. It's exciting and really inspiring to see all this work continuing to move forward in the investments and really looking at how to address that opportunity cost in a student-centered way through both policies and investments and the programmatic approach in those practices to support access for learners, whether they're starting adult education at the college or returning and upskilling adults. So Shayna, building on this same question to President Matui, I wanted to get your insights from the vantage point of a nonprofit that is closely tied to industry. Can you please talk about what investments, policies, and partnerships are needed to assure that Machinist Institute can provide holistic support services to your apprentices and those in pre-apprenticeship programs, knowing that nonprofits are going to have different funding streams and access to investments and policies?
Yeah, absolutely. So IAM 751 actually owned some affordable housing units in the greater Puget Sound area that they sold to the housing authorities to keep that intention of use, into perpetuity. Those funds were then invested, and that is the base for the Machinist Institute. So to come into a nonprofit and have some base funding is a miracle, right? Like that couldn't be a better spot. But we do need to have some public dollars as well to keep the nonprofit status. And so for me, the strategy on how to use dollars for support services is to not always be the lead on going after grant money and applying for a grant. Well, here's some new funds coming out. What are we going to do for that? But find out what do we want to do and even partner and let others take the lead on that in order to build some of our programs and address our core strategies. So one of the things we've done is partner on some funding with a CBO called Partners in Employment. And they serve the immigrant and refugee community in the greater Puget Sound area. And doing that early on in the design of the program, I think is key because they know that community. And so they were able to help us design when we offered the programming, when we needed to build in breaks for prayer time, and some other key things to make those students successful. The other thing is when you're talking about supportive services, we were all on board to give stipends to the students, and we could give them this much, and we'll build that into the funding model. But these were like high school age students. And if we gave them the funds or the support in certain areas, it ran the risk of kicking the rest of the family off of other supports. So really being mindful about not having these unintended consequences when you think you're doing the right thing, and find ways to make sure that we can support the whole family and not have one thing impact the other. So really key, everybody else has already said that on here about having those partnerships, really bringing them to the table early on in the design and throughout the grant. And also, I think making sure everybody on here in workforce is there's always data, there's always the tracking, there's always the measuring of your success. So what have the outcomes been, and is this working? We've definitely had to get employers to the table and press upon them the importance of being the solution to getting a younger demographic, because they all say they can't hire high school students because of insurance and all this stuff. So really breaking down the myths. And we've had some huge successes with employers who said that they could never hire younger ages, who then we do, an internship, we kind of bring them along, and then they're like, oh, we are hiring this person. We had no idea that somebody younger would actually show up for work on time. It's like, yes, they will. So, bringing everybody to the table when we're designing that and really tracking that. For years, we've talked about recruitment and retention and putting that into everything we do for growing access. But I think promotion needs to be a part of that. We want to continue to bring all of our students at each level back into, how we can support them in their careers. And I think partnering with community colleges is key for that. The discussion about the integrated basic learning, the iBest model in Washington State, which is, phenomenal. I think that's key. We really have to be a part of our pre-apprenticeships. And then also I think we can anticipate a real spike in the high school equivalency. I think COVID probably really derailed some people in their academic achievement. And so looking at our pre-apprenticeship programs and expanding that in partnership with community colleges to bring that element in there, if there's that need for the GED and high school recovery. So just being, mindful of all that. And then like Oregon, this year we had some pretty historic legislative accomplishments around registered apprenticeship and pre-apprenticeship. We had Senate Bill 5600 and 5764 that are both very, it was amazing to be a part of it. I was able to testify several times on the importance of supporting registered apprenticeship. It was amazing to see legislators so knowledgeable about registered apprenticeship, and they had really done their homework and done a lot of work to understand what the needs were. So we do have those that support both pre-apprenticeship. There's funding for supportive services. There's a small funding for vouchers for high school students to get their driver's license, because I don't know who thought it was a good idea to take driver's ed out of the high school, but that is another huge equity and access point that needs solved. And equipment upgrades, things like that. And then also some deeper work on the degree, the 2-year degree in conjunction with the apprenticeships getting their journey card. How can we identify if there's ways to make that more seamless? Any program that I am supporting, I want it to open doors and never close doors. We're lifelong learners here. And so how can we make that a real pathway with the community colleges on board so that people can continue to advance and get whatever the skills and certificates and credentials they need to be successful. Yeah, that's kind of all the areas where there's funding out there, and then how you just be strategic in it. Another thing just to mention that we're doing around the access part is we got some other grant funding to be inspired by, I don't want to say copy and cheat, but be inspired by community colleges in parts of the country who have gone down the road of mobile training units. So we are getting some of those mobile training labs that we can take out to some of the more rural areas of Washington and do some training, skills upgrading, things like that. So, there's a whole lot of different areas where you can look at ways to impact access and support services for students. So we're obviously trying all of them.
Thank you, Shayna. And it's exciting to see just that really creative approach to braiding funding and how you can do that to support training and education, and then the important role that policy can play in that and those investments. And so how to advocate and really build that awareness, which is a good shift to Dr. Pink, one of the things that I think has been really fundamental in this work is that frequently, in order to build support for these policies, investments, and partnerships to offer robust holistic support services, that shifting the narrative consistently emerges as a fundamental element. So like you talked about the work with employers, and that can be shifting the narrative with students or learners themselves to reduce the stigma and ensure they're aware of the benefits they can access, to changing the narrative with community partners and state agencies to understand the disparities in need. And then really in all of this work, building awareness that dismantles the racist and sexist stereotypes that frequently go along with the need to access benefit and resources. So can you talk a little bit about how Grand Rapids Community College has approached this? You've done some really innovative work in this space, especially with employers, and what lessons learned you would have about how to build support for this work and shift the narrative with more in the community.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Kate. And I will reiterate what several of my colleagues on here have said. So first of all, in reverting back to what President Matui said, and by the way, Mark, it's good to see you, friend. I will mention the fact of what we on our campus call contextualized program training that links our English language learning with one of our skilled trades areas to truly help folks get not only both those skills, but get to work as soon as we can, right? To get into those jobs. And that, Kate, for us has been, as President Matsui said, that's partnered, and it has to be partnered with our industry partners, right? So you've got to build that where your industry partners are alongside you. So what we've done, it started out with just doing CNC. CNC is that skilled training, skilled trades area. We extended that aside from CNC and machining, that went into carpentry, port construction, CNA, certified nurses. Those programs, the more we saw our CNC and our machining contextualized programs, how that was working so well, then we started pushing it out into some of our other areas. And Shayna, to your point, really in looking at how our apprenticeship model truly links with some of these type of partnerships with our companies, and how that really involved that in those companies and helping get individuals not only the education and training they needed, but help them get into good paying jobs. Some of our companies now are starting to, just so that they continue to make this, to have this progression be one that is smart and not just, okay, great, you got that at GRCC, now we're just going to throw you into that space. No, what some of ours are doing is that they are then integrating those individuals at the level of comfort for those individuals. So they may be on a machining line, but that line, one of our companies specifically out on the lakeshore, Gentex Corporation, that line is a line that is also with other employees that may be their primary language is, in this case, Spanish. They're doing that in a way, these are individuals who've received that ELL training, but in those classes, that education, yet still put them in a comfort level, then be able to work them at their comfort level onto just those main lines, so that we aren't just thinking in terms of, oh gosh, look at what we did. We did that, and now we're just going to throw that. No, let's make sure that that person has a comfort level that they're able to get into those jobs. And so we're seeing more of our partners do that type of work as far as integration of those employees. That to us is important, that we have that kind of connection with our employers, so that those are not just things that we can say, here's what we've set up, here's the program we set up, but the question becomes after that, so is that working? How'd that work? Is that something that individual continues to thrive in? And that's what that piece is really focused on. When you talk about this, especially with partners and such, when we think about our partners here on campus, how we partner with each other, and how what we do around not just our food pantry. And by the way, I've heard in different venues across the country, when I'm speaking on some of these things, or even listening to folks that talk about things such as food pantries, and some talk about, well, food pantry, that's kind of, if you're not paying attention, I will tell you, our food pantry effort has made big differences with our students, especially in these last 2 years. You say what you want to about some food pantry efforts, but when we see our students come in saying, this made a difference for me, we heard one of our students tell us the other day, who was getting ready to graduate, in talking about how the college helped them bridge that time gap when they were looking at not having the job because of having COVID-19 and trying to get over some of those gaps. And they talked about how even when we were shut down as a state, that they still could come to the college. We were putting bags of food in the back of people's cars just to make sure if they drove by, here, let's get that to you so that you can have some means of getting that done. And to us, that's been huge, a big difference, because when you talk about food, when you talk about our emergency funds that I know many institutions do it, you talk about emergency funds that we help students out when they have a car breakdown, when they have different things that come about that are unexpected. I can tell you the first thing they're going to drop, it's us. They're not going to stay in class. If my car broke down and I've got to have $300 or $400 to fix whatever it is, we're going to be the first thing gone if we can't connect them to resources so that they can continue to stay in school and get that car taken care of. So if it's not part of our emergency funds, how do we then also connect them to some of those resources? And so if we're not in those levels, if we're not that focused, and I'll put in the chat, the other thing that we've done, final, and then I'll shut up for a while, is what we call grcc.edu/get-help. I put that in there because that's on our website. That is we push that out to our students. We tell our students that is a resource for you to find more information and to be able to access. And you look at that, it has an abundance of information in terms of what we do on campus and what's in the community. And if we're not able to connect you with it face-to-face on the phone because you're talking to us here on campus, we can do it that way. If you can't get it that way, we're also going to let you know you can go to Get Help and you can see some of those resources out there as well to try to do all we can to provide as much of that information as possible. But that's vital. That's very important in terms of how we are helping our students be able to bridge some of these spaces of time where quite frankly, they're not figuring out and trying to figure out what that next move is. We hope that we're able to help them in bridging some of that.
Thank you, Dr. Penkin. I think that's such a good illustration of why policy and systems change has such a direct impact on individual lives that can be transformative and make the difference between whether someone earns a credential and gets a better job or not. So that systems work is really focused on transforming individuals' lives and those individuals who have not been historically served well within our traditional education systems. And that's a good segue to you, Jennifer, because ECMC Foundation has been investing in both systems change work and direct service, recognizing the need for both. So what role can philanthropy play in supporting systemic and programmatic work that's supporting that innovation and addressing the funding gaps that frequently exist on the program side that we've heard all of our panelists speak to? And what value and impact have you witnessed as a result of this multifaceted approach?
Yeah, I think that really is the role of philanthropy, to provide support to test solutions and to scale them to address these systemic issues. We really think about our funding as informing practice and policy. So it's really great to hear several of those examples articulated here today. I'd love to uplift 3 recent examples where we've seeded or expanded programming or approaches to improve student outcomes in post-secondary career and technical education, specifically by better aligning post-secondary education with the safety net programs. And really, across these 3 examples, all intermediary organizations, I see some themes, and that is, really understanding the challenges that are being addressed. And that's both the data, I think Shayna talked about that earlier, but also the lived experience and ensuring that student voice is really brought through in those decision-making processes, aligning resources and developing partnerships. I mean, again, that has been the sort of through line to this whole conversation. So we funded Seattle Jobs Initiative to look at supporting change at the institutional level. And that in particular was to ensure that there's new solutions to improve the students' experience in accessing the critical safety net programs. And again, I'll share links to all of these resources once I'm done here. We also have funded the National Association of Counties and looking at the role that local government plays in supporting higher education. And so, in addition to providing some funding to facilities and to the post-secondary institutions, they do a lot to ensure coordination across sectors and systems, and they have authority over the local human services programs like TANF, for example, and SNAP, and childcare subsidies. And then, the last example I want to uplift is the good work that National Skills Coalition is doing, and that's to ensure that state level coordination, that those statewide career pathway partnerships between post-secondary systems and institutions and those agencies administering public benefits programs are, exist and are working well. So great. You all put out a great toolkit beginning of this year, which also I'll ensure to drop in the chat here once we're done. So, again, the role that we play is funding the testing and the scaling. So there's a lot of work here still to be done, but there's some great examples and some best practices which can be shared.
Great, thank you. And thank you for the support in the field, because it makes a tremendous difference. And I can say that both at my prior role at Portland Community College and currently. So this has been a really robust discussion. We're hoping to have more time for Q&A at the end, but have been trying to address it as we go. There was one quick question that I haven't seen answered about what tipped over for the benefit navigators and really that advocacy efforts and what benefits. There's actually a podcast out, and I think we'll put a link in the chat where a team of us actually answered that question. It was a very collaborative effort. So it's the All In Student Pathways Forward podcast, and really a discussion about that. But really want to thank our panelists for your time, for your expertise, for your passion, and for the impact that you're making in your communities. So a round of applause. It certainly feels like we just brushed the surface, and know there are many other great examples of this work at community colleges, community-based organizations, and with philanthropy. So really want you to continue in this discussion, mobilize towards action you can take to advocate for these policies at the federal and state level. NSC will be sending out information about that. And then we also hope that you join us for our upcoming sequels. This is the first in a series of 6. The next sequel in the series is Making Skills Training Affordable for Working Adults. So really continuing and building on this thread. It will be on Wednesday, June 1st, 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern time. You can register via the link in the chat and see all our upcoming sequels on our website, nationalskillscoalition.org. And don't forget to save the date for our annual Skills Summit that is going to happen May 1st through 3rd. So hopefully out of the winter sickness area, but really appreciate this conversation. And thank you very much to President Matui, Dr. Pink, Shayna, and Jennifer. It's been a really robust discussion, and appreciate your time.